I mean, I think that's incredibly important for that. So today we're looking at one of the last major dysfunctions of our bodies. And before we get into that, we're going to talk a lot about foot health today and kind of like how that affects the rest of our body. So where have we been? Like, we started off with understanding like how do we stack our bones and how do we stack the skeletal structure of our system. And so that way we understand that when we place the head, or particularly like the ears over the shoulders, right, the shoulders over the hips and the hips over the ankles, and that we take the weight of our sternum and place that like just behind the balls of our feet, and we place the weight of our sacrum just behind our heels, and that helps keeps us nice and stacked. Then we went into talking about the head alignments and the shoulders, and helping us kind of take us from this rounded position and opening ourselves up, and like, again, pulling the head back. And we spend a lot of time opening up our necks and our shoulders so we can allow ourselves to breathe with more ease and have fuller, rich oxygenated breaths. And then last week, we looked at what is called the lower body cross syndrome, which is having that anterior tilted pelvis, the excessive lordosis of the lower back, and, you know, some of the causes of that. And then we learned how to like pull those pelvises into neutral, how to pull the sternums in, and then how to kind of strengthen some of the intrinsic muscles to allow us to have greater pelvic stability, which is incredibly important that we have that. And so today, before we really get started, I mean, that's been a long journey of just some areas of the body, and within each of those, we can go deeper and deeper and deeper into our health and our skeletal system. But before we get into that, I want us to, and I can already see that you did it. You took off your shoes, awesome. But we're going to go into a little bit of story time. And yay, story time. So I want us to take just a brief moment and kind of tell my story. And I'm doing this in the end because this particular presentation is very near and dear to my life and what I've experienced, and sort of why I've gotten into the things I've done. So, you know, I have, from a small age, I've been pigeon-toed, meaning that my toes point in, particularly my left one, and I've had weak arches or no arches, and I think that's something that I think a lot of us within the Black community have a tendency of seeing, right? We have no arches and our knees collapse in, and I have been plagued with pain throughout my life. And, you know, I remember, you know, I've been a runner since I was probably in the 5th grade when my mom took me out onto the track. It was the first time I really like started to be a runner. Well, when I get to high school, I'm starting to have knee pain. I'm starting to have lower back pain. And the medical field, I went to the doctor after a significant fall within track and field. I'd hurt my knee, but I'd also been having a lot of tendonitis in my knee. And the doctor basically said, well, you're a runner, you're going to have knee pain. And I remember kind of being like, that doesn't seem right. That doesn't seem, you know, like an accurate, you know, medical advice, but okay, if you're the doctor, okay, I'm a runner. Yeah. We all know runners have knee pains and hip pain, and I guess that's just what I have to do. And, you know, at some point, after I'd hurt myself, I did go to physical therapy, and they somewhat addressed my feet and gave me a little bit of ideas, but I think it actually worked in the opposite. So because I have pronation, you know, they kind of taught me how to sort of supinate, but as I've gotten older, I've really supinate, and that's really increased. So flash forward, you know, many years, I leave the corporate life. And, you know, mind you, at this point, I've been a hurdler, I've been a sprinter, I've been a jumper, I've been a runner. And I, you know, within my 20s, experienced a lot of hip pain, and a lot of, especially when it's cold outside, I definitely have a lot more body aches. And it's like, I'm too young for this. And I've joked that by the time I was going to be, you know, before I hit 40, I'm going to be walking, you know, with a cane, because there's definitely some days I wake up and I'm just like, ah. And so I get into fitness, and I realized the kind of fitness that I was in really didn't make sense to me. And I'm having more clients that are having pain, that are having, more dysfunctions and body alignment issues, and they can't do simple body weight exercises. And I was like, okay, I feel like I keep needing to go back and back and back. And so I found NASM, the National Academy of Sports Medicine, and their philosophy for fitness is one that really aligns with me in terms of fix the alignments of the people that you're working with first. And so then they're introducing that, these dysfunctions of the body. And I'm like, wow, I really do believe in this, and that building a solid foundation in our bodies structurally is going to be the best way for us to be fit, to be healthy, and to live our lives. And so that has moved me more into what is called corrective exercise. And that is what I do, right? I have a huge passion for correcting our bodies, correcting our alignments, because it's something that I've been doing in my body for, the past 15 plus years, and definitely have really been focusing on it in the past 8. And so as I'm diving in more education, I'm just falling in love with this, and I'm finding more and more that I'm really loving the feet and how important the feet is. The feet are to our overall structure, and particularly coming out of dance, it's even more important to understand how to be grounded and how to be balanced and how do you move from your hips. And so this is where I've come in, and this has really led me to really understanding that the pronation distortion syndrome is something that a lot of Americans, millions of Americans, are constantly plagued with. And, with that comes into how do we begin to add corrective work into understanding this particular dysfunction. So one thing to keep in mind is when your feet hurt, when our feet hurt, right, we hurt all over, right? And I'm sure that we can, really experience that if we've been walking all day or standing all day, and we find that, when we get home, we take off our shoes and we're like, we have like, our knees might hurt, our backs might hurt, our necks might hurt, our feet might, so everything hurts. And so I want us to really take away this mindset of that our feet really tell us a lot about the overall health of our being. And our physical being really plays a lot into the structure of our feet and how they're aligned and how they're basing, how they're being in how they are being. And so we can tell a lot about where we are mentally, emotionally, and physically by how our feet are feeling and how we're even placing them onto the ground. And so one of the things I want us to do is to get a feel for, is like, one, just how are your feet feeling today?
Are you asking me?
Yes, I'm asking you. How are your feet?
You know what? The more my feet are actually hurting today.
Oh.
And I'm trying to figure out why are my feet hurting. It's not like I did a bunch of walking today. I didn't do much today, but my feet, and maybe because you're talking about feet, maybe it's psychological. My feet are tired.
I'm bringing that awareness to it.
My feet are tired today.
Well, as we go through this exercise, as we go through this workshop, then we're going to really kind of dive into understanding, how do we actually bring better health to our feet and overall better wellness with that. And so, yeah, that's what we're going to really dive into today. And that's going to be really, really key and really important as we move. So let's really dive into what is the pronation distortion syndrome. Okay. And I'm just going to stand up because basically this is me. You don't have to stand. I mean, I don't know what your body structure is, but so, and we're just going to have to adjust a little bit so you can see my feet. Okay. So normally we've been talking about having, the 2-fist rule, the feet over, right? The hips over, the ankle joints, the knees are in alignment with everything. And you can probably see that, like, I have reasonable arches here. What you're not seeing is that I'm hardly really pulling my knees apart. And what this syndrome really looks like is that. So when I completely relax, you can see that the gap between my thighs is completely closed. My knees, knock, 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 right, are now touching, and that my feet have rolled in, right? So you can also see that means that I have excessive pronation in my feet. My knee flexion, so if I stand this way and I can do it, you can see that there's a nice bend, right? Natural bend in my knee. So there's a little bit more knee flexion, right? That also causes other things upwards, but really just focusing on really the thighs down. And from here, right, there is that extension, flexion of my knees. And then I can even see for my heels, right, that everything, my ankles also roll in as well. There's hardly anything. If I pull them apart and create everything and shift my weight back, right, then everything starts to create some space and have better alignment and have better foot control over that. So as you can see that like your knees adduct, like means that they go towards each other. So there's a greater angle this way of the knee joint. So that's the adduction. Remember, adduction is adding to the body or going towards the midline of our bodies. The internal rotation also means like there's internal rotation of your femurs, meaning that your femurs start to roll in as well, right? Because they're being pulled in. And they're being pulled in because those ankles are falling in. So not only do you have the pronation happening, but you have the internal rotation, which is also causing more issues in that knee joint. Now, as we kind of move into that, I want us to further look at what other joints are actually affected by this, right? And we're just talking about simple pronation of that. But you can see that there's two joints actually in the ankle, right? It is the ankle joint, which is where the tibia and part of the fibula, which are the two bones in your shins, intersect into the talus, right, with the talus bone. And so where those intersect, there's actually a joint right on top of that. And that one is a saddle joint, meaning that it kind of sits and it only has this action, right? And that is the top of that ankle joint. Well, underneath that is the subtalar joint as well. And that is actually happening with inversion and exversion. So you have one joint that's doing this, the other joint that's doing that. And when we have rotation, right, we start to have this happening in that joint, right? Meaning that we're starting to collapse in the ankle joint, and that the subtalar joint is actually rolling in and kind of staying in there. And then we're kind of pinching on one side, which is now affecting the mobility of us to have this action because now there's more bone in the way. Now, going up the chain, because we know that anything dysfunctions that are below it start to affect the joints above. Now you can see there's another major joint that we have an issue with, and that is the sacroiliac joint, which is also known as the SI joint. Now in the SI joint, right, that's where the spine intersects down into the pelvic region. Both of those joints on either side of the sacrum are meant to move and oscillate, right? And so oftentimes we'll have a greater amount of torque or torsion, right, that's happening in the sacrum. Means that the SI joint starts to either turn or tilt, and then we start to have more issues in the pelvic region, and we start to have more pain in that particular, where we're like, right off my tailbone or right off to the side, I'm experiencing a lot more pain, right? And so you might have liked that because, again, of how the feet are being aligned, it's pulling on all the other bones, which is either causing us to shift in our hips when we sit and when we stand. It's putting more pressure on those joints, and it's causing them to not be able to move, right? So that's two major joints right there that are affected by this particular syndrome. Now, if we move up a little bit higher, not very far above the pelvic region, you're starting to see that there is a dysfunction in the lumbar facet joints. And these are the joints where the vertebrae intersect with each other and allow for movement, minor movement of the vertebra. Now, as you start to have a little bit more lordotic curvature, then you're starting to have compression of that as well. You know, so as things are being pulled and I'm starting to twist, right, I'm starting to try to find and compensate above to stay balanced. And so in this one is where we want to kind of understand that like a simple pronation, right, of our feet and over an excessive pronation of our feet is actually causing major issues in at least 4 other joints, and 2 particular joints well above, right, where our feet are aligned. And so this is why this one is like really important. So the pronation distortion syndrome, we've already talked about the joints, we've talked about the bones that are there. And we're going to get a little bit more into anatomy in just a moment, but I want us to look at now what are the muscular things that are happening here. Tight calves, so the gastrocnemius and the soleus, the peroneals, which are actually the shin muscles right on the outside of our legs, right? They're also having major issues because when you pronate, you're having this constant flexion right here, right? So I'm constantly pulling on this muscle. It's also, again, why I'm having a lot of knee issues, because now not only am I pulling this way, but I'm also pulling this way, and my joints are like, I don't know what to do. My adductors, right? That knee being collapsed in is pulling on my adductors. You might have IT bands, right? How many times have we said, oh man, I'm really tight in my IT band. You know, you can touch them and you're like, oh wow, they're ready to snap. The hip flexor complex, right? We're being pulled forward, so all of this is pulling us in. And then you have issues in the bicep femoris on the short head, which is about right here. That's also being pulled as well. Now the lengthened muscles, right, are the anterior tibialis and the posterior tibialis, right? The vastus medialis, which is like the middle of our hamstring, the gluteus medius and max are also being pulled because they're being pulled into a position because now we're more flexed. And obviously the hip external rotators are having more issues. You can see in this diagram here, just that, right? There's internal rotation of the femur, and then you're starting to have an excessive valgus or hyperextension of the knee. So you might start to have meniscus pain. You might even have some bursitis of the hip, right? You might even have some slip discs or some issues within the facets of the vertebra. Now you're also seeing extensive pronation and inversion. So now your feet are actually starting to turn out, right, as we're starting to pronate, because now we're starting to have a limited mobility of those toe joints. Now, possible things is, like I said earlier, when we're starting to have those 2 joints in the ankles going in different directions, then we're going to have a hard time going inversion. We're going to play with this together, and dorsiflexion, because now there's excessive bone there. Again, you might be experiencing plantar fasciitis, which is the fascia that runs down the middle of your foot. A lot of times that starts to really get tight, and we have a hard time actually lengthening our feet, which we're going to really roll out today. So I see that you have a ball or something. So before we move on, we'll kind of like loosen up our feet before we move into our exercises. And then we're going to get into, you might have shin splints, you might have patellar tendonitis, which is like pain through the front of that knee, lower back pain, and then obviously having a valgus ankle, meaning that the ankle also like collapses in with that. So since you have a ball, which is great, I'm so glad that you brought it. Yeah, let's stay here for a moment on this slide because there's a few things I want to do. And I want to talk about, and to continue bringing our awareness to our feet, I'm just going to grab a few things. Now, do you have, let's say, well, you can use that. Can you grab your 2 pillows off of your couch?
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Fantastic. Okay, so what we're going to do, we're going to kind of do a little like fun little exercise of sensory. So you're going to take your little ball, and all I want you to do for right now, you're going to keep it in one hand. You're going to take your right hand, and I just want you to place your hand on the ground. And I want you to roll your hand around, like lift up your fingers, lift up the heel of your hand, right? Without the ball, just on the ground. Right? So ideally you should be able to feel a lot of the ground, right? If you start to push a little weight into it, you can feel your hands, starting to grip a little bit, right? You're starting to feel whatever's underneath you. Yes?
Yes.
Okay. So now I want you to place the ball underneath your hand, and I want you to sort of just allow your hand to roll around it, mold around it. So you're going to either mold and also just allow your hand to move around it and see what happens in the wrist joint. Right? So you can see that if we get closer, and I'll come a little bit closer, right? That my fingers will mold around it, right? That my base of my hand will also mold around it, right? And then as I stiffen my fingers, I can see that I can flex in that joint, and I can feel a lot. I have a lot of mobility with that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So now I want you to place a pillow between you and the ball, and then put your hand on the pillow, right? And as you press down, what do you notice in your body or in your arm that's happening with that?
I'm working it because I'm trying to feel the ball again.
Yeah. Do you feel like that something else is happening in your body, or at least in the arm? Do you feel like you can straighten out your arm well enough? Like, do you feel like you have support?
No, it's not like I did before. Of course not on this pillow.
Yeah. And do you feel like your hands are also sort of like do you feel like you have a little bit more uncertainty of like, how do I move? You know, you know that there's something under there, but you don't know how to place your body and or your hand, right? And now, do you also notice that there's slightly less mobility of your hand?
Yes, absolutely.
Like,
not free.
Exactly, right? So now I want you to put another pillow on top of that. Okay, now you notice that now you have to bend your elbow. Now you have to, now if you try to put your weight on it, right, you really like, there's sort of this like, can't do that.
So unnatural.
Can you say that one more time?
Completely unnatural.
Completely unnatural, right? So the reason I had us do this with our hands is I want us to think about this. The pillows are the cushions that we put in our feet and our shoes, particularly, right? So the hand was our foot in that, and how it relates to sensing the ground and the world around us. That the more that we put more cushion between our foot and the ground, the less stable we become, the less uncertain, or like the more uncertain, there we go, we become in our foot placement and in our ability to create solid, decisive locomotion, right? And it also starts to shift in the overall structure of it, and we can no longer use the feet in the same way that we did before. Right? And so I want us to think about our footwear just more passively. We'll talk about it a little bit more later. As we're going through this, is really understanding, again, that the more cushion that we put in there, the less mobility that we have. And as we know, when we begin using things less, we weaken the neuromuscular signals that go from our brain to our feet and our feet to our brain. So if we're unable to receive more sensory information, right, we are no longer able to send that up to the body. And then we're like, I don't know what to do. So we have this sense of confusion about our life. We have a feeling of ungroundedness, being unstable in our beings and our energetic forces and in our emotions, because we are literally not grounded. We're really not touching the ground, and we're putting more things between us in hopes of creating more support for our feet and the overall structure. But in reality, we are weakening the muscles that it is their actual function to do. So those are just a quick little exercise that we wanted to go into. And I want us to keep that in mind as we're starting to talk about natural foot alignment. And within that, I want us to understand, why should you free your feet? I am a huge proponent of being barefoot and wearing shoes that support natural foot alignment. Have you ever noticed in your baby's feet how there was tons of space between their big toe and the rest of their short toes? Right? They have perfect alignment, right? And we are meant to have a greater amount of spacing between the big toe and the rest of our feet. However, when we are in shoes that have narrow toe bases, then it actually causes us to, to crowd our toes. And you can see in this diagram right here in this x-ray of the person that there's starting to be this curvature, right, of their feet, and particularly on their right foot, right? You can see that that toe starting to go in. You can see it in my own feet that where they want to be is really nice and squished, but that affects, again, our ability to be there. So we're going to do a quick exercise of standing up. We're also going to roll out our feet real quick. Now, before we do that, while we're doing that, we can look at this diagram here, and we can see that the feet really have tons of ligaments. They have tons of muscles that are going in it and tons of bones. Like, I mean, this isn't even all the things that are happening in the feet. But it was just to get a sense of where our feet are right now. So we're just going to kind of rock back and forth. And I want you just to gently just like move your feet around, right? I want you to just kind of feel them out. We're going to kind of just get that sensory input really heightened and understanding of like, where are we at, right? What is underneath you? Squish your toes, wiggle them around. And before we move on, I want you to put that ball under your foot. We're just going to take some nice like roll out sessions. So like add a little weight to that, and you can start to feel different parts of these. And what you're creating is some beautiful spacing between these toes. And as we move on into the anatomy portion, we're going to really talk about what is the overall structure of that. But we're not going to move to the next slide just yet. But, you know, kind of just get a good feel. Roll out those arches, the outside of that foot, get as close. Roll out from side to side in, right, in under those toes. And we're going to use this a little bit later. Just do it on both sides.
This feels good.
Yeah, it should feel really, really good here, right? Now, as you can, like I said, like you can see, there's a lot of things that are wrapping around the ankle. There's a lot of things that are coming down from those shins and coming in. A lot of those muscles of the calves and of the shins are their endpoints are either under the toes or the top of the toes. And so the feet are really important for what's happening above. And so when everything gets tight, then it also tightens up the shins, which then tightens up, you know, the upper thighs, hips, and all the way up the chain. Okay, so now that we've kind of just got a brief like roll out of our feet, it should feel really amazing. We're going to stay standing up, and we're going to go into the next slide, and we're going to start to understand what is actually happening, right, with the overall structure and the function of the body. Okay, so there are 26 bones in the body. There are, there are 26 bones in the foot, each foot. There are 30, Anna Grace, can you go to the next slide, please? There you go. There are 33 joints in each foot. Now, they mentioned these are each foot. There are 120 ligaments, okay? So there are 13 extrinsic and 21 intrinsic muscles. So like in the foot. So in terms of what's happening in terms of what we're doing in our feet, right? There's 13 muscles that are in charge of what's happening in the outside, right? Lifting, moving, and then there are 21 muscles that are happening for like what's happening in the interior parts of that foot. There are over 7,000 nerve endings in each foot, okay? That is a lot of nerve endings, right? So again, when we put more cushion between our feet and the ground, we are essentially cutting off those nerve endings. And so major proprioception, right, that ability, that sensory input, their ability to feel the ground around us, the ability to know what's happening in the environments, right, is essentially cut off. And that's, so the feet are incredibly important for us to understand what should we be doing in our lives, what we should be doing in our days. And I want us to kind of like jump a little bit or just like bounce in place, right? You don't have to like overly jump, but you can feel it when we jump, right? The foot is meant to have shock absorption, right? It's where our arches are to help us with the propulsion of our being. So if we're like rocking back and forth, the arches, right, help with the redirection of energy and redirection of motion. It is also support of our weight, right? So if I shift from foot to foot, right, it is meant to support our overall weight of our body. The amount of force that I push into the ground is the amount of energy that I get back, right? Newton's laws. Equal and opposite reactions, right? So the angle in which I place that energy. So if I push it this way, you're going to feel that right reaction comes back that way, right? So I put my heel down, it also pushes me back because equal and opposite reactions, right? So the transference of ground force reaction is that. If I place it directly down, right, and push down, I should feel that reaction coming back up and underneath me. Also depends on like where do I place my feet. Now, there's also the compensation for the upper body malalignments. And so if there's other things happening in the upper body, my feet have to compensate for that. And they're also responsible for the grip and strength during locomotion, right? Our toes need to grip the ground, right? Also, like if I lean too far forward, so keep your feet underneath you, and I want you to start to lean forward, right? You're gonna feel your toes grip, right?
Yeah.
Right, if I lean back, right, my toes actually start to lift in a sense of trying to pull me back in forward, right? So if I go too far, then my toes press into the ground, again, trying to prevent me from falling over. If I lean too far back, right, now my whole foot comes off and you're going to start to feel the shins engage, right? So you can just see right there that if I lean, now if we lean off to the side, what's happening in our feet, right? The feet supinate, right, to kind of prevent us while one might stay stable. So you can already see now if we roll our feet around, roll our hips around, right? We're dispersing that energy in and around our feet, and our toes are coming up, our heels are pressing in different areas. You have pronation, supination happening. So you can already feel like just little movements, how much your feet are doing things, right? Is that hurting at all?
No. But it's it feels really great actually.
Yeah.
I mean, how many people think to do anything with their feet other than just put shoes on?
Exactly. I cannot tell you how many people, that's it, right? That I see that live the moment that they wake up, they put on their socks, they put on, they put on their clothes and they put on shoes and they walk around their house and they leave. And then, but then they wonder why when they take all it off and then they actually put weight on their actual feet, why they hurt. And so they assume that they need more cushion, right? Oh, I need more cushion in my feet. No, you actually need to spend more time in your bare feet to actually strengthen the muscles, right? In that, right? To be on the balls of our feet, to have good ankle stability, right? A lot of us cannot walk, like we're thinking if we're actually walking in heels, right? So walk, I want you to pretend like you're walking in heels, right? How much extension can you actually get in your ankles, right? Can you stack the major joint, your ankle joint over your toe joints? Is that hard?
It's very hard.
Yeah. So going back into the anatomy portion of this, we're going to talk about, right, what can we actually do with our feet? And I want us to know that there are major joint actions. We already talked about like just the structure of them, right? And also the things to point out, there are actually, when we talk about our foot, there's actually three areas of our feet, right? We have the rear foot, right, which is encompassing of the heel, right, and the ankle joint. We have what's considered the midfoot, right, which is very small. It's just in front of that ankle joint and kind of where the rise of the foot is, right in the middle of that arch. So kind of a third of that, right through that mid, right, is actually our midfoot. And as you can see in this particular diagram, that there's actually four major joints, right? You have the forefoot, which is in charge of the metatarsal bones and also the metatarsal phalanges, right? So you have your phalanges, which are your actual toes, and then you have your metatarsal phalangeal joints, right? And the most ones that are really super important is actually where we would call the joints that are right over the balls of our feet, right? The balls of our feet are actually the pads on the other sides of them. And they carry a lot of our load and a lot of our push. And then we have two joints in the midfoot. And that is responsible for, right, if we were to keep our feet down and we were to kind of roll our ankle through, right, it's those joints right there that are actually starting to do a little bit of the supination pronation, right, to roll. And they're in charge of the rotation that happens within that. So they actually work in the transverse plane. Not a ton of movement, but we actually do need movement through the midfoot, and we have very limited movement there. And then we have the actual ankle joints. And again, there's two joints, one where the tibialis and the fibrialis, intersect into that, and then the subtalar joint underneath. So now going back to the joint actions. Okay, so what can our joints do? So if I were to pick up our toes, so lift your toe, that is called dorsiflexion, right? Now if I were to put my toes down and lift up my heel, that is called plantar flexion, right? So you have dorsiflexion, plantar flexion. And I will say most of us live and move in plantar flexion, which causes a lot more plantar fasciitis, right? We're putting more stress on the sole of our foot and through the fascia. And so we start to have more issues down the middle of our foot. And so when we roll out, we might have more pain in that area for those reasons, or when we actually start to press down as we're walking, that's where a lot of times we feel that pain, because now we're having plantar fasciitis, and so we want to roll that out. Now, what else can we do? We can do what's called exversion, turning our toes out, but keeping the knees and the femur straight. We can invert, so basically saying no with our feet, right? So tapping out, tapping in, right? So we invert and we extrovert our feet, right? We can supinate, so we're going to pick up the midfoot, right? The middle of actual feet, the midline, right? And we can roll them out to the outside. Some of us have a hard time with this one. And then we have pronation, right? Where we're actually lifting the outer part of our foot and rolling in, right? So supination, pronation, and sometimes we might overly pronate, particularly if we have knock knees. We have a tendency, if we're bow-legged, we have a lot more supination. But in this case, we're not talking about bow-leggedness. We're really talking about, right, the pronation. So when our knees knock in, it pulls everything in. Now, our toes. This is also really, really important, that a lot of people have a really hard time with this one. Right, so when we talk about the metatarsal phalangeal joint, right, those is the big joints right over the balls of that feet, we should be able to lift up all of our toes, which is a extension. So this is toe extension, right? And we should be able to extend our toes, not only curl our toes this way, but also just press our toes down from that big joint, right? So if we lift and place them down without curling them, right? The curling down without curling is the flexion. Then you can curl, which is the short toe, right? Curl. So there's a couple of things happening actually in and around this joint that we have very limited mobility. Now, this is a challenge. I want to see if you can do this. Can you lift up just your big toes and leave the rest of your toes on the ground?
Yeah, kind of.
Nice.
Yeah, I could do it.
Do you find that they go straight up, or do you notice that they kind of want to go over your other toes?
I think they're trying to get over to the other toe.
Okay. That's a lot of that because of how the alignments of our toes are, because we're in narrow shoes. Now, I want you to leave your big toes on the ground, and I want you to lift up your little toes.
Oh, that's really hard.
Yeah. So this is something that you can work on, right? Is lifting up your big toes and lifting up your little toes. Those are really great exercises
I could kind of
do,
but not the other. That's crazy.
Yeah, right. But learning how to press to that big toe is also really important, right? So now we're going to lift up all the toes. Now I want you to just place the big toes down and then lift it back up. Place the big toes down and lift them back up. Right? And that same thing, we're going to lift up now we're going to lift up all the toes again, and now we're going to do that with the little toes. Put all the little toes down and pick them back up. All the little toes down and pick them back up.
Wow.
Right? And you will notice that they will want to spread as they do that, right? And having that ability to control our toes is really important. So now we're going to flip. So now we're going to go big toes, press. Now little toes, press. Big toes, press. Little toes, press. Big toes, little toes. Big toes, little toes. So those are some of the fun things you can do, right? To also strengthen your feet and to strengthen your toes, right? And to have that dexterity of our toes is really important. In understanding how do we move, right? It's important that they have that ability to actually do what they're meant to do. And they're meant to do things like that because they can. And it's really, really important. So those are just some of the, again, those are the joint actions and that are playing into what's happening. So, I mean, I can probably talk about the feet all day long, and because that's just a little bit of things that we want to understand. Now, I'm going to give you some simple exercises because that's what I do, right? That we can talk about daily foot health. Now, before we do these, I want us to understand what's called the tripod. Have you ever heard about creating the tripod in your feet?
I don't think so.
All right. So we talked about this a little bit before. I'm going to sit down. You can stay standing because I want to be able to show you the bottoms of my feet. Now, when we create a tripod, you can kind of see that in our feet. You can even see that this toe needs a little bit of love to be able to pull over, right? So it needs some abduction work. And so when we talk about the tripod, what we're training is the base of support, right? When we talk about bases of support, we want to create a tripod. We want to place the weight of our body in that first metatarsal phalangeal joint, right? In the joint that's in charge of our pinky, right? And we want it down in the center of our heel, okay? Where the bone would intersect. So straight down at the bottom, and a lot of us will either be off to the side, right? Or too far back, which then throws off where and how we create that tripod, right? And so we're going to create this real quick before we do these exercises, because it's also really important that we understand where and how do we create that, especially as we're walking, because when we place the weight here first, as we're walking forward, we want the load to be carried through and transferred through the arch and into this and out the top of the toe. And then we want it to then spread across to the pinky, right? And so now that base of support is the strongest structure we have. And when we're standing, we want to make sure that there's a 50-50% weight distribution between the big toe and the pinky toe, right? And then about a 50-50% weight shift or weight share between the heel, and I mean direct middle bottom, bullseye, right, and the front. So let's kind of play with that for a second. And we did that earlier without even knowing it, right, when we were doing, right, our things. Now, what I want you to do is I want you to lift up your all of your toes as you do this, right? And I want you to really focus on, right, can you spread your toes and shift your weight to the point where you feel like you have a good 50-50% distribution between the fronts, right? That you can feel it in your big toe and you can feel that your pinky toes and that joint particularly, right? That there's weight there. And then that there's about a 50-50% between the balls of the feet, right? Through those joints and the heel. And I mean directly in the bottom of that heel. So it shouldn't be too far out to the outer part and it shouldn't be in, but directly in that heel, right? So if I place my heel and then I go first metatarsal joint, heel, first metatarsal, and then I spread my toes to pinky, right? Heel, first metatarsal joint, and then spread my toes until, right, I have an even distribution on all of my foot. Were you able to achieve that?
Yes, I think so. For some reason, it's not equally on both sides.
Yeah.
And but then too, I noticed that it's not my natural, so it lets me know off a little bit.
So it's going to take some. So like me in particular, I have two different things happening in my feet, right? This ankle actually like valgus, which means my ankle drops in, right? But I have a weak arch, so my whole foot rolls in. So I have two different things that are actually happening in my feet. And this is something I do with my clients to actually understand that, you know, not everything is equal in both your feet, right? It also depends on how you move. So, but first having that awareness of our feet, right, helps. So a lot of times I will lift up my heels to kind of feel like where are my heels, right? If I roll, where can I actually find, where's the actual bullseye of my heel, right? And if you notice, I'm not digging, but I'm pressing directly down and underneath me. I also feel what that feels like in the, if I just where to pronate my foot, what it feels like to supinate my foot, right? What is it, what does my heel feel like, right? And can I find the bullseye of my heel where it feels like my shin bones are being driven down in and through my heel? That's our first one, right? Can you feel that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Now from there, I want you to place your toes on the ground, right? Place your feet and press your feet into the ground. And I want you to just gently pull your ankles apart from each other. And I want you to gently pull your knees apart from each other. What does that do to the rest of your body? Don't widen your stance, right? We're supposed to still maintaining our 2-fist rule, right? 2-fist rule, right? Now, plant your feet and pull, and just like pull on the ground without actually moving them or sliding them. This is what we call rooting this, right? We're rooting our feet.
Without actually moving them.
Without actually moving, right? We're pulling the knees apart, right? We're doing abduction, abduction. And we're pulling our feet apart, which you might notice that the arches pull up. You might slightly supinate. I don't see your feet, so I don't know what's actually happening in them, right?
Oh,
It's okay. I don't need you to move. Yeah, but you can just tell me what are you experiencing?
Actually, I feel it up all the way up in my it's not the hip, upper glutes.
Yes. Do you feel like your pelvis wants to move?
Yes.
Yes. Do you feel like what it's wanting to do is that?
That's what it feels like it's trying to do.
Aha!
Without me doing it.
Let it happen. So you may not have as much, right, pronation, right, in your knee, and you might not be as knock-kneed. I'm very knock-kneed, right? Everything rolls in. But when I pull them apart, I'm actually creating torque, right, which is actually pulling everything back into alignment. And so this is something that I actually do throughout my day to strengthen my glutes, both my maximus and my medius. And I'm learning to pull my knees apart, and I feel greater pressure, downward pressure into my feet. Right? So I actually feel more solid when I do this, okay? So what we're gonna do, now that we have this alignment, I want us to work on these exercises. We always wanna make sure that we're creating a good base of support before we do movement, right? And even though we're staying in place, we still wanna create this base of support. So as I move, right, and you're not moving, but like I'm always thinking of placing my feet underneath my hips. So one caveat thing to put in your brain, that your hips should always go first. Your feet should arrive a half a second later. Right? So if I'm moving forward, right, I'm not reaching for it. I am allowing my hips to arrive on top.
Oh, wow.
Right? So I will do another class another day on locomotion, but not today. So what we're gonna do, these are some exercises that you can take into your life. These are very quick, simple things. They're heel raises, toe curls, ankle circles, toe taps, pronation, supination, right? So we're gonna start off with our heel raises. So we can do one at a time, right? All we're gonna do is we're gonna take those toes and we're gonna raise the heels to actually create some mobility in throughout the toe joint. Now, if you notice, I'm not lifting up, right? I'm not pushing up into my body. I'm just lifting up my heel into extension. So I think of like, I'm trying to pull my heel through, right? Now, another thing we can do from this is to actually roll in and out over those joints. You might feel some pain. That's natural, right? Until we start getting more mobility there, right? And I want you to keep your foot underneath your body as compared to taking it out, where we lose leverage, right? So we're just gonna extend and roll them out so I feel downward pressure through the joints, right? Okay. And we're gonna do the other side. So you can do as many as you want to do this throughout the day, while you're talking to people. Now, the one thing I want us to pay attention to is the path that our ankle is traveling, right? We want to make sure that the ankle isn't traveling out, right? Initially, we want to make sure the ankle is traveling from the heel, and that transference is happening from the heel through the arch and into the ball of the foot, right? And into the first metatarsal joint, right? That's something that we really want to pay attention, right, as we're doing these, because then when we do calf raises, right, we want to make sure that, again, those ankles aren't falling out, that they're in, and that we're actually getting that mobility through those first joints, okay? So this next one are called toe curls. We're going to actually extend our leg back, put the tops of our foot down, and then pull that foot back and underneath us. Now pull the whole foot back and underneath you, keeping the toes nice and curled. Right, you're gonna feel a stretch through your shins, through the top of your foot. Don't release it, keep it nice and curled underneath, right? It's just an easy way to get into it, right? Now, how do you feel here?
I can feel that up all the way up here, believe it or not.
So a lot of that is fine, right? So if this is where you got, all I'm doing is extending and pulling that ankle through. If you want additional, then I start to do what are called heel presses, right? I'm pressing down and then I'm pulling that ankle through, pressing down, but I'm not flipping my toes over, right? I'm keeping my toes nice and tucked or curled, right, as I do that. Now, if you want a deeper stretch, right, I actually just come up and I do it kind of in this fashion, right? This is a great way to stretch out your shins. So if you're starting to have issues with your shins, right? And then you can also roll through them. These are always a little bit more ouchy because we tend not to stretch out this part of our bodies.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Let's do it on the other side.
Down here.
Yeah. Right. We're going to do that other foot real quick. Right. So I always just start out back so I can get my toes underneath. And then again, if I'm here and I feel that stretch, and I'm pulling that ankle through. And then if I want a little bit more, then I do what are called my heel stamps. Like I try to stamp my heel down, right, without uncurling my toes, but I'm always pushing into that full extension there, right? Cool. Now, while we're standing, what we're going to do is pronation, supination. Now, I want you to think of sliding your ankles apart and pulling them in, right? So apart, in, apart, in, apart, in, keeping our toes and the balls of our feet on the ground. It's actually a good strengthening exercise. It's also helping that midfoot, right? Getting some mobility in the midfoot. And building greater strength of our ankles, greater stabilization as well, right? So I'm just rolling in and out, but I don't want to lift up my toes. I'm going to actually just pull my ankles apart and pull them together, right? Yeah? Mm-hmm. Excellent. Now toe taps. Like you're impatient and oh my God, you're just waiting on somebody. Now I want you to keep trying to lift it up as high as you can as you do these taps. You're going to feel this in your shins. These are great for shin health, right? So if you don't want any shin splints, toe taps. And do a whole bunch until your shins are burning. Yeah, they burning?
Yeah, it's getting a little work. I'm getting a little workout out of this. Yeah.
And each time I'm trying to really lift them higher and higher, really want that mobility. A lot of people can't really lift them very far, right?
Ah, yeah, buddy.
Yeah, let's switch our feet. We're going to do it on the other side. All right, lifting, just tapping. These are great. Again, you can do this at your desk while you're sitting. Just tap your feet. This is why I've never had shin splints, because I have done these my whole life. I would just sit in class, not necessarily like from an impatient perspective. I would just keep lifting my toes, keep lifting my feet. And I've always had really strong shins. And the reason we have shin splints, just so you know, is that there's an actually imbalance of our calf muscles. So when our calf muscles, both our gastrocnemius and our soleus are super tight, you can actually sit down for this one. Then what actually happens is that the calf muscles are so tight that they're actually starting to pull your shin muscles off the bone. So they're starting to pull them, and they're so weak that, you know, they're not creating that balance in the front and back side of your feet. So these next ones are ankle circles. Very simple. So you can either hold your leg up, right? However you want, right? You're sitting in a chair, right? Just go counterclockwise and clockwise. I really love ankle circles. These are one of the things that they will tell you to do if you ever have a sprained ankle, is do ankle circles. They strengthen all the muscles and ligaments in and around your ankles and in your feet. You are doing supination, pronation, inversion, exversion, right? You're working on toe extension, toe flexion. These are amazing, just doing circles, right? So you're going to go counterclockwise, and then you go clockwise, right? And in time, you start to work how you do it, right? But you also start to work, right? Strengthening the muscles through your arches. And I love how much you're moving on the floor, and I highly recommend you just spend more time on the floor, because already you're in these constant moving positions, which are so incredibly good for your body, right? You can even lay down, right? Put that foot up, right? Yep. So while you're just like hanging out on the floor, rest your head down so you're not holding your neck or straining your neck, right? And you just go clockwise, counterclockwise. And if you want an extra bonus, you write your ABCs.
Mm-hmm. Do what?
Write your ABCs with your feet. Go A, B, C, D. And you do all of the letters of the alphabet. You will have really strong ankles. You will have stronger feet muscles in that, right? So these are just some of like very simple, again, very simple at-home exercises that you can do throughout the day, as many times as you want. The toe curls and the heel raises are specifically for stretching. Additional bonus, right? You can actually do toe yoga, right? And actually start to stretch out your toes by pressing and pulling. These aren't on the slide, but these are just things that you can do, right, to help build greater flexibility in that foot, right? Do them all together, do them separately. I do a lot of like pressing and pulling things back. I spend a lot of time on my big toe. Yeah. And then there's other things you can do about like actually spreading the metatarsal, which is the bigger bones like through the bulk of your foot, right? There's things you can do to actually massage out the ligaments. So the reason we did some of that with the ball. So I highly recommend, like the end of the day, if you've been on your feet a lot or just as a daily health exercise, right, is roll out your feet. Roll out multiple times, right? Just what we did, roll out your feet and really like get some pressure into them. The harder the ball, like the more you'll actually be able to kind of like space out stuff. But obviously you're going to know yourself in terms of like how much tolerance you have. Usually starting off a little bit softer and going to a harder ball is usually that nice progression, because we don't want to just like jam really hard things into very sensitive feet. But this is going to be really, really amazing for actually getting more space between your toes, getting more mobility and flexibility in throughout the ligaments and muscles of your feet, and actually starting to get some good spacing in the actual muscles. I mean, starting in the actual bones of your feet. So yeah, those are those are just some things we can do with your feet, right? And that really is it for today. Wow. Do you have any questions? Anything that you want me to go dive in a little bit deeper about?
You know what? This is so amazing to me. I mean, just the way this ended. I mean, it was great. Each day was great, but
yeah.
Today I think was like the grand finale for me. I have not did this much with my feet probably in my adult life. I hate to admit that.
No, I mean, and most people don't, because you know why? We stop being on our feet. We sit down so much. We put them in narrow shoes. Like we really are just like you said, you haven't thought about it other than putting on shoes, right?
Right. And right now my feet feel so good. I will not put shoes on today. I'm not putting on shoes.
Especially being in your house. Like I tried not to be on my feet. Or I try not to be on my feet. I try not to be in my shoes. And so my athletes always knew, like in summertime, coaches, I'd be at track meets, people like, where are your shoes? I'm like, I don't need shoes. Like, I'm fine. I run around the track. But being home so much and not being in shoes for even greater amount of time, I have my feet, my toes have actually spread a lot more. So they're actually starting to go back to their natural alignments. And I can see like how they sort of like deform themselves or like form themselves around each other. But even now I've focused on really spreading my toes, and I have focused on, a lot of this foot health of stretching them and strengthening them. But honestly, just being out of shoes has been a game changer for me and my feet. And all of my clients work out barefoot. So
Wow.
like there's a no shoe policy and even in my office. So that way people can have a better relationship with and I really love this quote. Are you
Yes, I love this quote,
Thich
man.
Nhat Hanh is like, this is something like, so as you are walking, I think this is a really great quote. And I do use this quote in my brain quite often, is walk as if you are kissing the earth with your feet.
Love it.
And it helps you with your how much impact and how much pressure. And that's another thing too, putting on more cushion, actually, like we actually try to have more force because we're trying to like find the ground. And so when we actually go to less feet, we're like heavy and we hurt. And so, but if we realize being barefoot will actually help you with this quote. So if you're barefoot and you start to feel like you're hitting your heel more, it's because you haven't had that response feedback or that feedback from, because you've been in like hard shoes, right? And so you're used to hitting there with that level of force. Then when you take that level of cushion away, you're like, oh, that actually hurts. And you think of how much force is actually going up into your body. And then you start to actually have that down roll action, down roll, just like you're kissing the ground. You want that nice, gentle pressure, right, as you're doing it. And it really helps you shift that. And I didn't put this in the slide, but I want you to write this down. We have an amazing local company called Zero Shoes. All right. And so if you look up Zero Shoes, XERO shoes.
Oh, and XERO.
Yep, XERO shoes.
Okay.
They are a promoter of natural foot alignment, shoes that support natural foot alignment. And we actually put the whole thing together. And they are a local company here out of Broomfield. And I like them tremendously because they carry a wide range of natural shoes. So winter boots, running shoes, walking shoes. They are starting to come out with more casual shoes. So I know somebody like you who likes to dress all nice and fine. You might not find much there. However, I will say that I did a half marathon training in their HFSs, and amazing how it shifted my awareness to how I was running, how I was feeling in my body. I have at least one of my other clients that has bought a couple of their shoes and just gone out and working in their yard. They have a mountain house. They were like, wow, how much greater they were able to move their feet and feel more secure climbing up and down ladders. So they were noticing how their body was moving and standing because they were actually able to feel the ground more. And so they were taking those 7,000 nerve endings and bringing them back online. And so they were having more informative input coming up through their feet. So I highly recommend
check it out. I am.
Check them out. It is my goal to actually have a link through my website, just haven't gotten there yet. So that's something that's coming next year, is partnering with other companies that support natural foot alignment and other alignment type products and services for people to have. I will have a foot product coming out soon, which will have rollers and we'll have some of these exercises in place. So you can probably see that for probably about end of first quarter of next year. So keep in touch, follow me on Facebook, and you'll be able to see when I push those out. Man. And obviously any future workshops that I do.
Cool. Katrina, keep doing what you do. Keep doing what you do. This is amazing. Next time it's going to be more people. I'm going to tell people. I'm just going to tell people about this.
Yeah, that'd be great. Like I do virtuals. So if anybody wants to work with me virtually, I'm happy to work with them virtually. If you know people in Denver, send them my way. I'm very much looking forward to being able to deliver more products and more services to people, and to just, that's my mission, is to, like, I want people to have a better relationship with their bodies and how their body moves. And so they feel confident and comfortable to go about their lives. And that to me is fit. That is healthy to me, is that you're like, I have greater tools in my toolbox to know how to exist in the world from a postural perspective and a movement perspective.
That's right. That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
Well, thank
And
you so
you're
much.
very welcome. Spend more time on the floor. Seriously, spend more time on the floor. It will do wonders for you.
I feel you. I hear you. Definitely. Definitely. You know what? Last Christmas, I got for a Christmas present, I got a yoga mat for the first time. And so I'm so proud of that I have a yoga mat and was using it regularly.